We're live on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. And we'll be tackling some questions today at the end. So if you have any, please send those right on over. Now, I am not alone today. I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Senior Recruiting Manager David Kamisic. David, how you doing?
I'm wonderful, Phil. We're gonna tackle a good topic here today. So excited to bust some myths about the recruiting process.
Absolutely, one of my favorite topics of all. You can't tell David is pretty excited as well. Again, that topic today, just like David prefaced, is going to be really tackling the top 4 myths as it pertains to recruiting. Okay, we're going to be talking about, really how to go about the recruiting process amongst those 4 myths. And those 4 myths are going to include, hey, if you're good enough, college coaches will find you. Okay, a little bit of a myth we're going to be covering. You can really leave everything up to your high school coach or your club coach when it comes to recruiting. We'll talk about, really starting the process not until junior or senior year, why that's a myth. And then we'll also cover, I can just walk on if I don't receive an offer. We'll cover that as well. And again, we'll be ending things today. We're covering some Q&A. Please submit your questions over if you have any. And again, when it comes to this first myth, it's one of my favorites. Okay, when it comes down to thinking if you're good enough, coaches will just reach out to you. Coaches will flock to you. Coaches will come as long as my talent or your talent level is up to a certain degree. Not always the case. And really to cover this first point, we're going to kick things off with a video.
Analogy, one of our good friends that works with both Perfect Game and NCSA, Don Mitchell, he phrased it perfectly, or used the analogy that, Carrie Underwood had to go to The Voice or, America's Got Talent or whatever show she was on in order to be discovered. And it's the same thing, like you have to be proactive. College coaches don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the time to look at 500,000 high school players. But what they do have time for is to evaluate the players that reach out to them. If they're showing an interest, if you're a player showing an interest, I'm going to look at you. I'm going to look at your video. I'm going to look at your history and see if it's a good fit. So, that's something that every family has to do regardless of talent level.
All right. Great stuff coming from Coach Nelson Gord over at head coach over at Harper College. And overall, big takeaways. Even, superstar singers had to be proactive. We equate that to the recruiting process. It's the same. And something else that he touched on, time is absolutely valuable for a student athlete as well as a college coach. David, when we look at being proactive, when we look at the time sensitivity, can we add a little bit more context as to, really busting this myth?
Yeah, and first of all, Carrie Underwood, I believe, was American Idol, so we got to correct Nelson there, but I digress. Yeah, I think the thing, Philip and I have talked to thousands of parents over the last decade or so here at NCSA, and we hear this: "Oh, my kid's good enough; coaches are just going to find them." But as you heard Nelson say, there's so many kids out there. Right? Only about 7% of high school athletes will actually get an opportunity to play a sport in college. So that's a very small percentage when you think about the hundreds of thousands of athletes that are out there competing at the high school level. Again, coaches don't have the time, they don't have the ability, the bandwidth to know who all these recruits are. Obviously, they're going to do things on their end to be proactive in researching student athletes and being able to identify student athletes that they're interested in recruiting. But as Nelson mentioned, the student athletes who are taking the initiative to engage with that coach, if I'm a college coach and a student athlete is reaching out to me to express interest in my program, that's somebody that I want to pay a little bit of attention to. I want to see some video. I want to be able to understand what the student athlete may bring to my program, and someone that, if they're expressing interest in me, in my program, I'm going to want to take a look into them, because I could reach out to hundreds of kids as a college coach, and if none of those are a good fit for my program or aren't interested in my program, I'm sort of spinning my tires. I'm wasting my time a little bit. And I know some people also think, well, we play travel ball. We're going to these clubs. We're going to these showcases. We're going to these tournaments. Like, we're going to get seen. We'll be okay. That's not always the case either. Again, think about all the tournaments, all the camps, all the showcases, all the kids that are there, all the teams that are there, all the different fields going on at the same place. I was at a West Coast Elite basketball tournament a few years ago, and they had 3 different locations in Orange County having games being played. And one of the courts, or one of the venues that I was at, had 10 courts going on at one time. So when a coach is at an event, they're there to specifically evaluate somebody in person who they've already either seen on film, they've identified, they may have already seen that person before, they may have offered that student athlete and just want to kind of kiss butt a little bit and show face. So again, don't rely on my kid's good enough, they're going to get seen. If your kid's 6'11" and they're dunking on dudes sophomore year, probably good enough to get seen. But Philip, there's so many kids out there, so many kids that are at an equal playing field when it comes to that talent, when it comes to that level, that again, it really makes it impossible for college coaches to know who everyone is and just find kids. Again, the being proactive part is something we'll touch on probably quite a bit throughout this Facebook Live, and that's really important. Not just, again, sitting back hoping that a coach is going to find me a scholarship is going to fall out of the sky and it's going to be the perfect place. So I think that's a big myth that we're busting here, number one.
Yes, certainly. And just to expand on the last point that you covered there, David, we do want to give some credit to the college coaches because, again, frequently there's just factually gonna be way more student athletes than college coaches, but coaches are taking the extra mile. You know, outside of, again, targeting certain areas, they do host camps, as you alluded to there, David. And again, at those camps, they are oftentimes at some of those camps to recruit. Now, I can remember when I was a student athlete going throughout the recruiting process, you know, being a little bit ignorant to some of the ins and outs of what's supposed to happen. Whenever I went to a camp, I would see a college coach with a notepad writing some things down, and I would ignorantly think, hey, this college coach is there watching student athletes for the first time that they didn't know about, and they're writing their name down so they can follow up after. Really, that's not the case. They're there with that notepad with a list of student athletes that they already knew coming into that camp, so they can actually monitor, verify, get that athlete to pass the eyeball test, see that athlete in person for the first time, not necessarily that first introduction. So it's always about being proactive, big time. That's absolutely what you need to do as a student athlete. And when it comes to being proactive, we talk about the recruiting process as a journey because that's what it is. Okay, it takes a lot of work in the recruiting process. And oftentimes, as families, as student athletes, the assumption can be that, hey, my high school coach, my club coach is going to handle that work for me. And that's not always the case, although we would like it to be, although we want our high school or our club coach to give us all the help possible. We simply cannot always put it fully in their hands because of the amount of work that it takes in the recruiting process. Now, David, typically we want to value our high school coaches, our club coaches as a resource and give them a pivotal role in our process, but not entirely give them the ownership.
Yeah, it's really be on a student athlete, number one, even ahead of the parents, I think, in the situation, right? Student athlete needs to be the one driving the bus and really in control of this process. I think the best approach that you can have is talk to your high school coach, talk to your club coach, your travel coach, and let them know, hey, I'm interested in playing in college. What help might you be able to provide for me, or what connections do you have? Again, depending on the tenure or the experience of that high school coach or that club coach. Some coaches may know hundreds of college coaches. Some coaches may only know a couple. Some may not even know any. So again, it's important to have that conversation with your coach and find out first and foremost, what part will they play? Some coaches are going to be super hands-on. They're going to be, being a huge advocate for you. They're going to be sending your video out. They're going to be sending information to coaches. Others aren't going to play much of a part at all, and they're going to leave it up to you to do. So the first thing to really do, again, have that conversation with your coach, figure out what role will they play in recruiting, but don't solely rely on them to get you recruited. Even the coaches that do know college coaches, they may only have a limited number of coaches in their network or that they have connections to. And those schools or those coaches, those programs may not be the right fit for what you're looking for as a student athlete. So again, a coach can be a huge resource. Certainly you want to leverage any connections they may have, use them as someone to be a reference for you if a college coach needs to speak out. But I think it's important, again, have that conversation with your coach, ask them what role they can play, what help they can provide, but don't just sit there and rely on your coach to be doing all the legwork. Again, that coach is probably coaching a bunch of other kids that are interested in playing in college. They probably got a job, they've got a family, they've got a lot of things they're worrying about and they've got to take care of for themselves, that it's not always their number one priority to help you get recruited. So again, have that conversation, Philip. I think that's a good starting point to know what role will your coach play in recruiting and how much of this am I going to have to really handle myself versus how much can I maybe rely on a little bit of help from a coach.
Absolutely. As a summary, the high school or club coach can't play for you. So you shouldn't be giving them the entire ownership of your process. Now, they can, again, help you get better. Okay. They can help out along the way. So again, make sure you facilitate that help instead of giving that entire basis of ownership to that coach. Now, this next myth is something that we actually hear very frequently when speaking with families, and it makes sense why it's a myth. And it's really that the recruiting process really doesn't start until junior or senior year. And when we look at it, we can peel back the onion in a couple different ways as to most live conversations with college coaches happening maybe later on in high school. Naturally, being an upperclassman junior or senior year, just thinking that's when things happen, but also the disalignment with the academic and the admissions process. Typically, as a freshman or early on in high school, we're not applying to colleges for admission's sake. Typically, we don't have a full GPA listed just yet when we're underclassmen. So again, it makes sense as to why this is a myth. Again, not starting the process until junior and senior year. But David, just like you mentioned, this is about being proactive. A lot of the aspects of the recruiting journey is about being proactive and being proactive as early as possible.
Yeah, and the NCAA and their recruiting rules says you're a recruitable student athlete once you enter high school. So when you walk into those doors your freshman year, that first day, or you're wondering what's going on, you're nervous probably, you are in the NCAA eyes a recruitable student athlete. As Philip touched on, June 15th or September 1st between sophomore and junior year is really when college coaches will start the direct contact with college coaches. But early on as a freshman, as a sophomore, you can be getting questionnaires, camp invites, letters from college coaches that are more generic, letting them know or letting you know that you are a prospect on their recruiting watch list. So again, it's not all of a sudden junior year hits for you and college coaches sit back and say, okay, let's take a look at this 2023 class and see who we want to start recruiting. They're taking steps 8th grade, freshman year in some cases. And as Philip mentioned, they're building a recruiting list. All right, if I'm a baseball coach, here are my top 20 catchers I've identified, my top 20 right-handed pitchers, left-handed pitchers, etc. And then once junior year hits, that's when things get more serious. That's when those coaches start picking up the phone. They start calling you, maybe inviting you out for a visit, having some more steady conversations. So we hear this all the time. I think this is probably the, and Philip, I thought you brought up a good point. It's understandable why this is a myth, but it's probably the biggest one that we hear where families say, well, he's only a sophomore. She's only a freshman. We're going to wait until junior year. Well, there are other student athletes who 8th grade freshman year, they're building their profiles. They're sending out information to college coaches. That's the beautiful part of starting this process early and being proactive is as a freshman in high school, you can email any college coach in the country you want. So you don't have to wait again for coaches to find you or wait until your junior year to do this. The sooner you can do this and freshman, sophomore year, use that as a way to get on lists and cast that net wide, get coaches knowing who you are. That way, when junior year hits, you've done legwork that's going to start resulting in some direct conversations and some more serious conversations from college coaches that will eventually hopefully lead to the offers, the scholarships, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and we oftentimes talk about the set amount of work typically that needs to be done in a recruiting process. And that set amount of work is usually 4 to 5 years worth of work, depending on the sport and a couple other variables. But again, make it easier on yourself when it comes to the recruiting process. It's challenging enough, right? With 4 years worth of work, a set amount of work, ask yourself, do you want to fit 4 years of work into maybe a year or two? Or do you want to spread that 4 years of work out and average it across your full high school journey, your full recruiting journey? That is really how you want to manage the recruiting process, by starting early, maintaining control of the recruiting process, and really letting your preferences drive your recruiting process instead of being reactionary, in which we run into a lot when it comes to later on in the recruiting process if you start later. Now, typically, if we look at where we are now in the calendar, okay, we're getting ready for spring in a lot of areas. I know here in Chicago it's getting a little bit warmer. We're branching into the summer coming up pretty soon in a few months. This is that time period where we have a lot of seniors, right? And we have some that have started really early on, and we may have some that started a little bit later and maybe a bit on that crunch right now. Those on that crunch right now, David, they may be looking at some walk-on opportunities or maybe some lower level opportunities. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, before we dive into that, just one other point around starting junior, senior year. I think it's important to mention. We have college coaches who send us roster openings. They send us, hey, we're looking for, a left wing in the 2023 class, or we're looking for a D-back in the 2024 class. We already have college coaches sending us roster openings, requesting information on freshmen and even some 8th graders already. So this isn't just us speaking this because it's, what we're trying to get across. It's because this is the reality of recruiting. Coaches are identifying kids earlier and earlier these days, and they're trying to get ahead of it as much as possible. So just wanted to hit on that point. But the last myth we're going to hit on, and Philip touched on it, is if you don't get an offer, you can just walk on. That's not always the case. College sports do not work like high school sports. You don't just go to the school, try out for the team, and all of a sudden make it. A lot of times, especially at the higher levels, Philip, these coaches are even recruiting preferred walk-ons. They're recruiting student athletes who they know they're not going to give a scholarship to, but maybe they want still to come play for their program. So I think that's a really important piece to this as well. It's not just like high school. You have to be recruited to play, even at Division III schools where they don't have any athletic scholarships available. They are still recruiting student athletes. So again, all levels, they're recruiting kids. It's not just you show up, you try out for the team, you walk on. Some schools will do that. Some programs will have that. We've all maybe seen the movie Rudy, where Rudy did that to get on the Notre Dame football team. But that's not the reality, and that's not how it is across all of sports. And we've got a clip here queued up from former special teams and quality control coach at Akron University, talking a little bit more about this process. So let's hear from Tony.
We do have, our board set, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in, way more athletic, great player. Are they immediately going to go to the top of the board? They might get on the board, but they're not going to go to the top because of all the intangible information that we've already found out about some of the guys that we've made contact with. So I think it's really, really important for recruits to make contact and then stay in contact with the programs that are showing them love. The idea that you're going to pull out a scholarship in the bottom of the ninth is really, really difficult, and it doesn't happen a whole lot. I've told plenty of kids that, the kids that are getting walk-on opportunities from us are kids that have been with us the entire process. They just didn't get the scholarship because there was 2 other scholarship players in front of them. But we recruited them just as hard as we were recruiting the scholarship players. So if you're not getting that right now, then you need to look for more programs to talk to.
So again, for student athletes who are later in the process, whether you're a senior at this point, especially, again, the longer you wait, the less scholarship opportunities there is going to be, right? And that's ultimately what a walk-on is. You're going to that school, you are playing for that program, and that program is not paying you a dime in athletic scholarship money. So, Philip, again, for those seniors at this point, being more realistic, looking at the D3, NAIAs, the junior colleges, but knowing if you're looking to go D1 or D2, if you're a late bloomer or someone that catches that coach's eye, that may be a possibility. But again, even at this point, a lot of those schools have already recruited walk-ons to come play for their program, so it puts them in a little bit more of a challenging spot.
Absolutely. And I think the main takeaway is if that's a route for you where you're leaving it up to maybe a walk-on spot, and there's a number of different scenarios, whether you have a budget for school to get it paid for, you're just not pressured for a scholarship, or, hey, time is up. We're soon crossing that line of, walking across stage and getting to college. Regardless of where you fall in your situation, if walking on is an option, you want to do your darndest. You want to do everything you can to be listed as a preferred walk-on. Okay, very seldomly these days do we see open tryouts, if you will, for walk-on spots, open tryouts for just any students to join the actual team for whatever sport we're talking about. It's really pivotal that you shoot for a preferred walk-on spot where, again, you're basically on a team already. You do everything that a scholarship candidate, that a scholarship student athlete has done regarding the recruiting process, coming on the campus, and even practicing. You do everything except getting the scholarship funding. And in that boat, as a preferred walk-on, you actually are in a position where you can earn a scholarship down the line if that's something that's important to you, more so along the lines of the Rudy story. But again, nothing changes in the recruiting process if you're looking to be a walk-on. You still have to communicate. You still have to be proactive. And again, you still have to really embrace the challenge because it is a challenge. You don't just walk onto or come onto a college program and say, hey, coach, I'm going to try out for the team. When is it? Not how it works anymore. Really embrace the process, whether you're shooting for a scholarship, full, partial, or again, coming onto that team as a walk-on. Really important.
And a lot of walk-ons too, I think it's important to know you're not going to be playing a whole lot if you're a walk-on. You got to really work your way into that slot. You hear stories about guys like Wisconsin bred, I think, a bunch of walk-ons back in the day. Jim Leonard, Mark Tauscher, guys that played in the NFL that we're the exception. They're not the norm. They're the exception to that rule where you walk on and you work your way into that slot. So again, if playing time is important to you, maybe that's where you look at the D3 NAI route versus looking at a walk-on opportunity, but a good myth to bust there as well, Philip. So so we busted 4 big ones there. We got some questions flowing in, Philip. So let's get to some of these questions. The first one we're going to take is from Jordan. I'm going to turn this into a current question, but Jordan wants to know, do I have to play in high school to play D1 basketball? His high school is a D3 school. Not the biggest thing in the world in terms of what size school you're at, but more than likely you're going to have to make your high school team in order to play in college. Philip, just if you want to touch a little bit more about this. Again, the size of the school that you're at in high school may not affect what level you can play at. It may take some more work to get you recruited, but more than likely you're going to have to be on your high school team, if not your high school team, at least a travel team to get an opportunity to play college basketball.
Yeah, with over 90% of the athletic recruiting process done online, again, coaches really finding recruits online. The size of the school, of the high school, is not as relevant as it used to be in the past. Still, again, relevant. You may have to be a little bit more proactive if you are in a very small high school. Nonetheless, you need an online presence regardless. And again, as far as a high school coach, if you get on their radar, one of the first things they're going to be looking for is what you've done on that high school team. So it is a little bit of an area of importance that you do make that team, you are on that team, and that says a lot for a college coach. And as a college coach, they oftentimes like to see that you're on an AAU team, some kind of travel team as it pertains to basketball. Not that it always outweighs high school, but in a perfect world, a college coach can see you doing both high school and a travel team, and that's going to heighten your likelihood.
Awesome. Next one's more of a comment from Johnson, but Johnson says, big thanks to NCSA for always sharing helpful info. Mouthful there. Big thanks to everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you guys hopping on. And again, if you guys have any questions individually or any topics that you'd like us to discuss at any point, feel free to drop them. We can always give you a buzz individually too to talk about your specific student athlete. But kind of a current one here from Jeff. Jeff wants to know, has the NIL affected the scholarship process? For those that don't know what the NIL is, it is the name, image, likeness, which last year the NCAA put into place where student athletes, previously they weren't able to get paid ultimately to do advertisements, to do marketing. They weren't able to get paid for their name, their image, their likeness. That has now shifted. Philip, I'll toss it to you for this one. It really hasn't affected the scholarship process. It's affected maybe a little bit the impact that some of these really high programs have in terms of some extra juice that they have to recruit student athletes these days. But nothing has changed with the scholarship process, specific to Jeff's question when it comes to the NIL.
Yeah, really good question. I think that's the right question, actually, when we're dealing with, finances potentially, when that student athlete can receive some extra incentive. Prior to the NIL rule being passed, that was the reason why student athletes couldn't receive any kind of monetary incentive because of scholarships, because of the NCAA violating the amateurism status. That is no longer necessarily the rule. It doesn't impact, again, the scholarship process. Still the same approach when it comes to, again, targeting a scholarship. You want to do all you can. You want to be proactive. You want to check in with the program to see, if they're equivalency or head count scholarships. You want to do all your due diligence there. But as David referred to there, with the NIL being passed, notably at your higher level programs, Division I schools, you do get that incentive where you can, whether it be video games, whether it be how that college specifically uses your name in different presses, regardless, you are able as a student athlete to earn financial incentive with no violations towards the NCAA, and you potentially going off to bigger and better things. So again, the answer is no, it doesn't affect it. This is a positive for student athletes of all kind. This does not affect the scholarship process. It's a positive for that student athlete to line up other opportunities if they see fit.
Yeah, it is strange. I was watching the Duke Carolina game, Coach K's last home game a couple weeks ago, and during that game there was a commercial that starred ultimately one of Duke's starting point guard, and it's crazy to see college athletes being starred in these commercials, which again last year that would have been a huge NCAA violation and super illegal. So cool. We got a last question here from Kendrick that we'll take before we wrap things up here. But Kendrick wants to know, how do I get on the radar of a D1 college in ninth grade? I think first and foremost, if you're targeting just Division I schools, number one, you have to be good enough, right? That's the important piece as a younger student athlete. Coaches do want to see progression. They know you're going to develop, but in order to get seen by a D1 coach or to get kind of that attention, you've got to obviously be good enough. I think that's an important piece to it. I think early on, especially, don't pigeonhole yourself to just Division I schools. Cast that net wide. And you never know how the student athlete may develop or grow, especially in male sports, in which as a freshman you're going to grow, several inches, put on a ton of weight, develop differently. So I think it's important first and foremost to not clue in too specifically on a division at that young of an age. But Philip, just some tips around this for Kendrick. What do you recommend in terms of how to reach out to schools? Again, we talked about it earlier. The great part of starting the process early is you can be reaching out, emailing college coaches as a ninth grader. That can include Division I schools. So what advice would you have here in terms of for those that are maybe trying to target Division I schools at an early age?
Yeah, first off, great question. It's the right question because as a ninth grader, you're starting the process proactively at an early point, which is very good. Now, whether it be your Division I schools or any school out there for that matter that you potentially could be interested in. Again, very important to not pigeonhole yourself into just one specific division. Now, within all divisions, as you cast a wide net, do some research. If it is Division I, take a look at some of those Division I rosters. Take a look at what some of those athletes look like, whether it be, background, academics, whether it be size when it comes to measurables, positions. See what those attributes and characteristics look like for some of the current roster at some of those programs that you may be interested in, and see how you stack up. You may fit some of those characteristics now, but more so it's about looking to see what you can mold yourself into to be a more ideal candidate for Division I programs, Division II, Division III, whatever you'd be looking to shoot for. Now, aside from that, when it comes down to getting on the radar, once you've put in that research, you want to take it strategically. Okay, you want to take it strategically. Understand that a lot of coaches may not be able to reach out back to you directly. That doesn't mean they're not looking. So this is the time where you have to have an online presence. Okay, make sure you have an NCSA profile online where after you make that initial introduction, college coaches can track your progression throughout the years. Okay, and that initial introduction can be in the form of filling out the questionnaire for that specific school, or even sending out an email, which you can do at any given time, just as an introduction, letting them know who you are and you're potentially interested in that program for the near future. Include your NCSA profile in that email, and again, keep that up to date over the years so college coaches can also track your progression while you're keeping them updated.
Yeah, and we're obviously biased here, but I think that's really one of the best parts of the NCSA profile, especially for the younger student athletes, is again, you can email college coaches. If I email the Division I school as a ninth grader, though, that coach cannot directly email me back. So the great thing about the NCSA profile, you're able to see, did they open my email? Are they following me? Did they view my profile? So it helps take away some of that guessing game, especially for the younger student athletes in terms of being able to track. All right, I've emailed 50 coaches, 42 have opened my emails. And from that, 17 viewed my profile, and now 7 are following me. So it really simplifies that process a whole lot more. Because again, if you just send out a bunch of random mass emails, again, that coach cannot specifically respond to you. They may respond with something generic like a questionnaire or a camp invite. But again, being able to track that progress and being able to continually update those coaches then every few months is going to be important as well. So again, be proactive early on, especially. It's going to put you in the best position when it comes to the recruiting process. So awesome. We're hitting the 30-minute here mark, Phil. So I know we want to dive into some of our recent NCSA commitments. So as we do every Tuesday on Facebook Live, I want to recognize some of the student athletes in our network who have recently made their college decision. And that includes Carson Drager. Carson's a golfer, as you can tell here, out of Texas and staying close to home with his college decision, committing to Concordia University in Texas. Carson and his family got off to a little bit of a later start in the recruiting process. They got linked up with us last summer. So heading into Carson's senior year at that point, he didn't really have a whole lot of contact. Great golfer. It's at a 78 average, great student, high GPA, high test scores. Things got rolling in our network a little bit. He was able to connect with a school semi-locally there in Texas, Concordia University. nicknamed the Tornadoes, which I don't know if there's a whole lot of tornadoes in Austin, Texas, but if so, he's going to be tornadoing the ball down the fairway.
That's why Concordia sticks out. Very good, very good. Coming up next, we have an awesome shot, action shot there in game from Nick Chappelle III. A little bit about Nick. You know, he's that student athlete that we've been talking about. Nick got to start in the recruiting process, joining NCSA in 2018. Now in his senior year, looking to, again, go over to Louisiana Christian University. A little bit of backstory again about Nick. Just a ton of work that Nick has put in when it comes to taking ownership of the recruiting process, really embracing the recruiting process for what it is. And that started in ninth grade for Nick, maybe a little bit prior, but it even escalated up into every year up until now. So just a huge congratulations to Nick. You know, a little bit of what he's experienced these last few years. He's had 30 follows from college coaches directly on his NCSA profile, over 70 searches directly. Again, just looking to coordinate or communicate with a number of different coaches, being able to see Nick's NCSA profile. But the other significant point, just to showcase how on top of things Nick has been, Nick has 5 different videos on his NCSA profile to showcase his progression throughout the years. Now, again, we're only in high school for 4 years, but to be able to showcase 5 different videos, it just says an extreme amount of how proactive Nick was throughout the process. And that made it easy on college coaches to see the progression. So again, huge congratulations to Nick, again, headed over to Louisiana Christian University.
And last but certainly not least, on the hardwood, Mackenzie Eulers from Kewanee, Wisconsin. Shout out to the Green Bay area. I love my Wisconsin people up there. Senior here, Mackenzie and her family got an early start in the process. So they signed up with NCSA during the beginning of her freshman year. Again, put a lot of time and effort into the recruiting process. The profile that Mackenzie had in our network ended up being viewed by 111 college coaches, appeared more than 1,000 searches, had 50 coaches following her. So I put a lot of time and effort in and ended up choosing a local school, Ripon College, a D3 program in Wisconsin, the Ripon Redhawks, Phil. Ripon Redhawks. So great Division III program. So Mackenzie staying close to home and getting a great opportunity to play at a great school. And I feel like since we ended with basketball, Philip, it's only fair that I wish you and everyone watching a happy March Madness to you and yours. It's the most wonderful time of the year. No offense to Andy Williams and Christmas, but this is the best time of the year for sure.
We won't spoil any or give any spoilers with any bracket busts or any favorite teams or anything like that. But I want to wish the same to you, David, and wish obviously the same to all of our viewers. And we'll be right back here next week, Tuesday.